This is an entry from the diary of Private Azariah Smith. He was a member of the Mormon Battalion. I'll pass that around. It says, March the 6th, and it was 1847. We drilled as before, and through the day we play ball and amuse ourselves the best we can. It is very cool weather and clothing scarce. The Mormon Battalion marched over 2,000 miles. Well, that was what it said. The Mormon Battalion marched over 2,000 miles from Council Bluffs, Iowa to San Diego. It was the longest march in U.S. military history. They arrived just as the hostilities with Mexico ended. Smith was a member of C Company. And a friend of mine, his name is Angus McFarland. He's from San Francisco, and I'm called a baseball historian, and I call this guy baseball prehistorian because he discovered baseball up in San Francisco almost 10 years before anybody else even knew it was there. A man named Alexander Cartwright claimed that he introduced baseball to California in 1849. He was in San Francisco for a week, and he taught everybody how to play baseball in a week. Then he went to Hawaii, and he's in the Hall of Fame. So we've always had a lot of fakers, not just in politics, but in baseball too. And my friend told me, he said he had a theory. And his theory was that during the Mexican War, that he thought soldiers from New York had brought the game out to California. So he was thinking it would be somewhere up in the Bay Area or Monterey. And then he sent me an email and said, I think that maybe somebody with the Mormon Battalion was involved. So I went to the Mormon Battalion Center in Old Town. I'm sure you've seen it. How many of you have gone there? I hadn't been there before, and it's pretty nice. And they found the entry, and then I contacted the man who wrote this. It was called I think it was called the Gold Diary of Azariah Smith. The Gold Diary? What does that have to do with baseball and Mormons and California? After he gets mustered out, he's going to make his way back to Utah. He stops at a place up near Sacramento. It's called Sutter's Creek. Mm-hmm. And for those of you Midwesterners, it's called Sutter's Creek. And he writes, and there's an entry, and Angus, we're giving a presentation at the National Saber Convention. It's going to be here at the end of the month. And he found, in Smith's handwriting, how he says, Mr. Sutter, no, what? I can't remember the name of the guy that discovered gold, but Marshall. Okay, thank you. I'm glad you're here. And he, Mr. Marshall brought in this nugget. He thinks it's gold, and sure enough, it was. And I did a little research on Azariah. There's only one picture of him. I think it was in 1898 or something, or 1899. They had a reunion, 50-year reunion for all the 49ers. So he came out, and there's a picture of him. And what I understand is that because he was there when there was gold, and he was a bachelor, that they couldn't wait for this guy to die. I don't know if you're aware of what happens when people die. People show up, they want the money. So they couldn't find it, and they dug up all his property, and they never found it because he didn't get any of the gold. So, you want to know the birthplace of baseball in the state of California? San Diego County. San Diego County. Angus discovered that the soldiers did indeed bring it to California, and there was an entry in the newspaper up in Santa Barbara that soldiers played baseball up there in April of 1847. So just a month before, this young 18-year-old private wrote that in his diary. Okay, when I did my history for this book, I was involved in some history books with a history professor at the University of San Diego back in the 90s, and he was, I have to explain to you who I am. The first time my name appears in print was in reference to baseball, was in 1995. And I was identified as Bob Swank, baseball researcher. I was just telling somebody about this because my stepson set up a blog or a website or something, and several years later he said, "There's a message for you on your website," and somebody wrote, "You amazing son of a bitch," and it was my ex-wife. So, you remember Kevin Kernan, sports writer for the Union Tribune, and Kevin went to the New York Post, and so he helped me with some various projects, and he wrote back and he says, "Hey, you're really moving up because now you are listening to San Diego's preeminent baseball historian." And I didn't come up with that title. Okay, so I'm going down to, I went to the library. I was at the San Diego Historical Society, and I going through old newspapers, and it wasn't easy to find references to baseball. They didn't have a sports page, and I remember the first reference I found to ball was about an actual ball. They were having a ball. But they had all kinds of games they played in Old Town. Okay, January 7th, 1870, San Diego Union. The headline: "A gentleman asked if there is such an institution as a baseball club in San Diego. He thinks there are enough active young men here to put this thing through. We haven't any club here now, but he says there are men enough and there's plenty of room." That's January of 1870. The next thing in the paper, May the 3rd, 1871. "A movement is afoot to organize baseball." But before they could even, teams could be organized, 18 young, eager ballists, B-A-L-L-I-S-T-S, that's what they call baseball players. Ballists met at the plaza, that was Horton Plaza, on, well, I'm getting ahead of myself here. What I'm wearing, it says Fort Wayne Kikianga. Does anybody know what a Kikianga is? Has anybody ever heard of the Kikianga? No. The first professional baseball game was played in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Nobody would have known that, right? Fort Wayne, Indiana. It was supposed to be played in Washington, D.C. It got rained out. Cleveland was going to play the Kikianga, who were a terrible team, but they went out and got some ringers and they brought them in. And the Kikianga won 2-0. And it was first professional game. That was on May the 4th. I told you about this article, May the 4th. So that's the first professional baseball game in America. And May the 6th, a couple days later, is when the I don't have my glasses here. That's when they played the first game in San Diego. No score, but that's how far behind. You want a cheater? Okay, the first recorded game with score, Daniel Ullman's Newtown team. Now, this is where Horton was developing, and he made all the blocks real small because he could sell more property on the corner lots. Okay, he sets this up, and they get challenged by an Old Town team. The name of the Old Town team was the Extempore. Miles, what does extempore mean?
Extempore? Extemporaneous?
Well, what better than that?
Well, just on the spot, created.
Well, that's, yes, but the specific meaning is without preparation. Okay? Well, Old Town played, they were extempore, they were without any planning that really went into it, because they were also without a center fielder and they were without a right fielder, which is kind of tough.
Could be a real problem.
Yeah, and they lost to Ullman's team 48-35, so it was much closer than one would expect. The reason the scores were so high back then, they didn't use gloves.
Oh.
And if a ball bounced and was caught on the first bounce, that was an out. So it was a different game. Okay, May the 27th, that's, okay. You're all historians or you like history. This is from June of 1880. San Diego played a championship series, had all these championship series, against a good Orange baseball club from Orange County. This is the flowery language. Gansey, the Orange left fielder, took the ash and, pending a brief delay occasioned by a loose base, a beautiful mockingbird in full plumage perched on the instruments of the band, who rendered that popular air in their happiest style, leaving nothing better to be desired. A badly thrown ball, poorly caught, secured Gansey his first base, going to second and third and as opportunity offered. Boss went out on 3 strikes. Captain Parker was again called upon to send up a star hunter, which came down a foul and went out on another sky searcher which went up perpendicularly to home base, having come down in the extended digits, committee of 1, who went to retrieve it. Tally, big O for the Orange. Isn't that beautiful? And the whole article is like that. Journalism has improved. Okay, now here's the one that Jamie put on, I think, on your website about that, because this story involves Horton. Okay, Alonzo Horton attended one of those games with the Orange. He always wore a dark suit with long formal coat, topped off with a tall silk hat. A foul ball alighted on Mr. Horton's head. I'm quoting this. Never one to be nonplussed, Horton demanded San Diego be given a score based on his miraculous catch. You see what this guy knew about baseball. The umpire refused, and the crowd burst out laughing. Ha ha ha. San Diego won all 3 games, and the union reported that 3 more brilliant games have seldom been witnessed. And you get those kind of comments all the time. These are the greatest games ever played right here in San Diego. Aren't you proud? The secretary of the Orange Club wrote a card to the newspaper complimenting the cordial and gentlemanly reception accorded to him. They also politely thanked San Diego, the ladies with their beautiful bouquets, the band for their fine music at the ball grounds, and the public in general for their friendly and hospitable treatment. So San Diego, good fans, good people, all that stuff. In 1882, during a ball game, boys at Mrs. Bush's F Street School, they broke Dr. Rimondino's window. Has anybody here broken a window playing ball?
Yeah.
Put your hands up, I want to see. Okay, yeah, because so have I. So this is what was in the paper. All the boys each chipped in a dime to pay for it. And the newspaper, somebody there, reporter, that was the proper way to look at it, boys. We give credit for your quick perception of the equity of the case. Most grown people would have applied the letter of the law and shirked all responsibility. So these moral tales are always told, and I thought it was interesting. In 1887, you remember a team that visited San Diego last week called the Phillies? What did San Diego do? They lost. That wasn't the first time they'd lost the Phillies. In 1887, the Phillies came out here. And getting to San Diego was not easy back then. And they beat it. The 300 lovers of the national game, including a number of ladies, caught the train to driving racetrack in Pacific Beach. You ever heard of driving racetrack before? Anybody? There was a racetrack, and the grandstand still stands. And most of you don't know where Rancho 101 Motel was, but the grandstand is still there. At least last time I looked. Mossy Ford is there. And that was a racetrack. And another famous, remember that, Miles? There was another famous thing that happened. There was a woman matador, and she took on horseback, took on some bulls. And that received a lot of press coverage. And if you'd like to read about it, go look it up. And this was women back in the 1800s being pretty macho. Okay. Oh, I forgot to give the score. The Phillies defeated San Diego 31-7 and 17-1. So, well, when the Cincinnati Reds went out to San Francisco in, I think it was 1869 or 70, they beat them like 56-2. But scores were, San Diego still a real neophyte in the baseball world. Now, I love this story, and when I wrote this, it was they were trying to get a new stadium in this town, and they had a savior come and buy the Padres. Do you recall that?
Ray Kroc.
No, not that savior. He really was a savior. I have great respect for him. Ray Kroc, when he bought it, and he told his wife that he just bought the Padres, she thought he bought a monastery. She said, "What'd you buy a monastery for?" Right? And she inherited the club, and then she wanted to give it to San Diego, give it away. And the baseball, they wouldn't allow it. You know why? They didn't want to open the books. They didn't want the public to know how money gets spent, because they appreciate these ball players and they're hiding money, and they're the biggest bunch of goddamn crooks you ever saw. Excuse me, but that's the way I talk. So here's what happens. A guy named Marco Hellman, he came to town, this was 1890, and he was praised in the papers for his money and his enthusiastic energy. And he's going to bring real first-class work to the San Diego Diamond. And he brought the Sacramento Senators out of the California League to play as San Diego. And he promised them high wages. And he sold stock in the club, and he leased beautiful recreation park, which was out at the end of the trolley line. And we live in the day now where everybody's going to be riding the trolley, right? Right? What's with you? Aren't you going to ride the trolley? Well, I mean, this is the way things were then. And so anyhow, rumors started that maybe there were some financial problems. And I like the next part. Hellman snuck off to the Santa Fe depot and said, "I want a locomotive quick to take me to Los Angeles. Money is no object." And it was the biggest ticket this young clerk had ever written, $500. And in record time, this is a quote from the paper, "One of the noblest steeds of the Iron Cavalry of Commerce appeared on the northbound tracks, ready to carry the fallen baseball magnate to sanctuary in the city of angels." But Hellman didn't return for the ticket. He just disappeared into the night. And if you look it up, the Hellman family is still in Pasadena, and they're very wealthy. Well, I'm a historian, so I contacted him, said, "Hey, what happened to Marco? That guy really ripped off San Diego." And guess what? They didn't respond. Okay, in 1900, a local promoter, an admirable man, his name was Jack Dodge, he wanted to get players from the Eastern Leagues. Do you know what the Eastern Leagues were? That's what they called baseball in the East. They didn't call them Major League Baseball. It's the Eastern Leagues. And that's something we're going to be talking about at the SABR convention. It's going to be the history of baseball in California before 1957. Now, you've all heard how they were crying in Ebbets Field when the Dodgers came out to LA. Well, if any of you were here then, if you were Coast League fans, they were crying because the Coast League was going to be destroyed. The Seals and the Oaks were gone up in the Bay Area. The Angels, the Hollywood Stars, they knocked them out. They thought, that San Diego, they were still Lane Field, but they went ahead with plans and they built Westgate Park in Mission Valley, and the league did survive. But so that's what we're going to be talking about, the early history of baseball in San Diego. And it's pretty colorful. Well, they got Dodge got players from the California champion Sacramento Gilt Edge. Now that doesn't mean anything to you, but they really were a good team in the early 1900s. Got players from the Oakland Dudes. How do you like that? And they got the name because they were dudes. They dressed well. Turkey Mike Donlin from he was playing for the Cardinals then, and New York pitcher Luther Dummy Taylor. You guess how he got his name? No, it wasn't because he was stupid. So he got these guys from the Eastern Leagues. This is the headlines of the San Diego Union. Broke all records for airless baseball. Greatest game that was ever played in California. 15 innings without an error. San Diego won. And this game was even mentioned in the Sporting News, which you know is the Bible of baseball. Almost perfect. 1 run, no errors, made in 15 innings. San Diego with the dummy pitching scored a superb victory over San Bernardino. And that year, San Diego won the league championship with 17 wins, 6 losses, and 1 tie. He got the name Dummy because he couldn't hear. And baseball signals, they were invented because of a player, I think it was Dummy Hoy. And he couldn't hear what he was supposed to do, so they came up with the signals. How many of you remember Irv Norton? Played for the Yankees in the 50s. And he was, okay, way to go. Yeah, you met Irv. And he was later was a coach, the third base coach for the Oakland A's. And, most people don't follow what the third base coach does, but his mother did when they were in the World Series. And she said, "What were you doing out there, Irv? We're not Catholic." Going for all the annex. But that was kind of a nice story. They're good Lutherans. Good Lutherans. He bought a liquor store in Pasadena, and he said his mother always called it a delicatessen. Liquor will come into my story here. Because, when the American League started in 1901, the thing it had going for it that the National League didn't have, it was the teams were owned by brewers and distillers. So they sold beer at the games. Well, now, do you think that was popular?
Oh, yeah.
Damn right it was. Okay. Will Palmer, the Pickwick Theater, Pickwick Hotel. He was a local house mover, and he was they really moved some stuff. I mean, they took houses over to Coronado. There's a historical site. Got some great pictures of that. Well, he owned the Pickwick Theater, and in 1907, he challenged the Pacific Coast League champion Los Angeles Angels to what he called the West Coast Championship Series against his team, San Diegans. Well, that sounds crazy, doesn't it? The Angels won Pacific Coast League. Their star pitcher was a guy named Dolly Gray. He won 32 games. This guy's pretty good. Well, San Diego had a couple of ringers. It's always good to have some ringers. One of them was Chief Myers, who grew up on a reservation in Riverside, and he was a catcher for the Giants for years. Chrissy Mathewson's favorite catcher. And the other was a promising young Washington Senators rookie from Orange County by the name of Walter Johnson. I heard some recognition there. Okay, Johnson's pitching the first game. San Diego wins 1-0 against the Angels. And Johnson even knocked in the only run with the sacrifice fly. Okay, Dolly Gray is pitching the next game. The Angels win 5-2, so it's a tight game. The third game lasted 12 innings. Los Angeles scored 4 runs in the top of the 12th to claim an 8-4 victory. The locals were furious about questionable calls made by the umpire. The Union reported, "There is not the slightest doubt but that Carnes is one of the most unpopular umpires who ever handled an indicator on the San Diego Diamond." So they were really upset with this guy. Now it's game 4. It's Sunday to be a doubleheader. Pitching for the Pickwicks was a man named Jack Carnes, the same guy that umpired the first 3 games. Now, have you ever heard of something that crazy? And he's they're leading. The Angels are leading 1-0, but in the 4th inning, San Diego scores 4 runs without a base hit, and the 4th run crossed home plate because the Angels were arguing a call. And LA shortstop Walter, whose nickname was Judge Nagel, he called the umpire an uncomplimentary name. Again, I'm quoting, "And the humorless arbitrator promptly took his good right fist to the aforesaid judge's jaw." And that ended that discussion. So in the 6th inning, a hand injury forced Carnes to leave the game with the bases loaded and 1 out. On 2 days rest, in comes Walter Johnson. And he coaxed a double play to end the inning. He shut down the Angels, and San Diego wins the 4th game, 4-3. So now the series is tied. Who's going to pitch the last game? Walter Johnson. Well, his arm had gone sore, and San Diego lost. Start crying. So sad. 9-3. Now, for those of you that don't already know, Walter Johnson was nicknamed the Big Train. He won 417 games during a 21-year career in the majors, and he was an original member of baseball's Hall of Fame. Great pitcher, great pitcher. He set the strikeout records that lasted into, I think, the 60s. I started forgetting this stuff. Okay. Now, Palmer's Pickwicks evolved into a team called the San Diego Bears. Well, I'm not showing you stuff, am I? See, if I had a PowerPoint, I wouldn't be screwing up like this. That is an ad for Hellman, the guy that made off with all the money. He was really promoting the hell out of it, and I'm sure he didn't pay for the ads either. I bet he owed the union. And this picture is City Stadium. You ever heard of City Stadium? You probably knew it as Balboa Stadium.
Yeah.
You see the colonnade at the back?
Yeah.
And it was the 2 teams, and I couldn't figure out which one of them. One of them's Albar Shrine. That's pretty easy to figure out because there's Albar on it, of course. But this one, I couldn't figure out what it was. It's all letters all mixed together, and it's GHP. GHP. What could that be? And in doing more research, Golden Hill Playground.
Oh, wow.
And there was a lot of baseball played at Golden Hill. There's a lot of baseball played at University Heights. Baseball, not softball, baseball. But this is a great picture, and I thought you might like it. That's the Horton House that preceded the U.S. Grant. And then this guy that I put in there, that's Marston, George Marston. Did you know he was a ballist? He was. He loved baseball. And he played for Beloit. And I don't remember if he played with Al Spalding or not, but he wasn't a bad little baseball player. And he sponsored teams, and so he played quite a bit in the early history. I think I want to read something to you. With the growing popularity of Sunday baseball, an obtusely veiled and lengthy sermon about the evils of baseball appeared in July 28, 1889, San Diego Union and Daily B. The Reverend F.R. Perkins warned that baseball would corrupt young people in Logan Heights. The twin demons of baseball, gambling, drunkenness, would result in desolated homes, commercial dishonesty, theft, blasted lives, and all forms of vice and violence. These kind of sermons usually appeared in the front page of the paper. And I guarantee you they were longer than any accounts of the ballgame. These were very popular, and ministers and the good folk of San Diego, they did not like baseball. I also brought a diagram. Now, where were these ballparks? Some of the early ones were right down here in downtown. One was, I think it was between Broadway and C Street, and between 4th and 5th. It was called Lockton Square, something like that. And that's where they played. And they played in several places around here. But Logan Heights was where most these ballparks were. One was at Recreation Park, was at, well, when you get off 5 and you're going over to, you're on Logan Avenue, and you want to go over to Coronado, and the entry, that's right where the ballpark. They played a lot of baseball there. And then they played down on Main between Evans and Sampson, and then Athletic Field, which was the biggest one, was down at 32nd and Newton was down there in Boston, and it was a pretty nice ballpark. And a lot of teams did come out to San Diego, and that's where they played. They also, I'm getting a little ahead now, they also played at a place called YMCA Field, and it was at the foot of Broadway. And when Bill Lane moved his Hollywood Stars team down here in 1936, they didn't have an adequate ballpark. City Stadium, Balboa Stadium, the left field was way too short. So they built Lane Field, and they did it in less than 2 months. It was done with WPA funds, between $20,000 and $25,000, and something really miraculous happened. All the government agencies cooperated. No, that doesn't happen. In fact, something actually got built in San Diego. And so it was quite a miracle that the way that the ballpark appeared. It was all made out of wood, and it came down 22 years later. It was, a friend told me today that I sent I gave some pictures to Ken Kramer. I assume some of you watch Ken Kramer. And he said Ken showed a picture of dismantling Lane Field. It was kind of a cool picture, taking it apart.
I cried tears when that happened. I love Lane Field.
Yeah, well, people tend to remember Lane Field more than Westgate Park. Westgate Park was a beautiful ballpark, and when they built San Diego Stadium, they took it apart and they shipped it up to Oregon, and it's still up there. The light stanchions, and it's in Lane County, Oregon. How's that for ironic? But at Westgate, Phil Collier, the sports writer, his lead was, the termites are crying. They lost their dinner. Because I had ball players tell me, they said, yeah, I had a home run out to left field, and he said, went right through the bleachers, made a hole. He said, I really thought I was strong. But it was being eaten away by termites. We know termites are in San Diego. So, okay, there's that story about the evils of alcohol and baseball, and how it's going to ruin everything. Let's see. Okay, so the Pickwicks evolved into a team called the San Diego Bears, and they really were quite a good team. They won the California Winter League in 1911, and the future National League home run king Gabby Cravath was on that team. Now, the way I got started in doing this, I always liked baseball, but has anybody heard of Gabby Cravath? Does that ring a bell with anybody? Has anybody heard of a guy named Babe Ruth?
Yeah, yeah.
What records? What were his 2 big records? Season home runs and career home runs. Well, he had to break somebody's record. Gabby Cravath. I can see the way you're smiling. You knew. Gabby Cravath in 1915, playing for the Philadelphia Phillies, hit 24 home runs. 24 home runs. That's all he hit. There were 16 teams then. Cravath hit as many or more home runs than 12 of the teams. He hit more than entire teams. So he was a man way before his time. Baseball was played base to base, a lot of bunts. And, it was called the dead ball era because the ball was sometimes the ball would last the whole game, and it'd get knocked out of shape and be dirty. And it was when Ray Chapman was killed in 1920, that pitch that hit him in the head, because he couldn't see it. They didn't have lights, so then they started. You had to throw in more white balls, and of course you're aware there are a lot of home runs being hit now. I think the Padres, like 60% of their runs are scored because of home runs. And you hear some of these, some of these guys you never heard of. They're hitting all these home runs. Well, you remember the steroid era where the players were juiced? Well, the ball is juiced now. And personally, I don't like it. Home runs, there are just too many home runs. That's one of my complaints. But Gabby Cravath was quite a guy. He was 32 years old when he got his start in the majors because he was out in California, and they weren't interested in California players. So he led the National League, I think it was 9 years in home runs, like with hitting 11 or 12. One of the years that he led the league, he was only a pinch hitter, and he still led the league. So he was quite a guy. Now here's what I didn't expect when I was doing this research. I didn't realize the impact that blacks would have on baseball in San Diego, and it was pretty major. And I'm not going to have time to go into it. This guy, his good friend Walter McCoy, played for the American Giants. And I'm going to be talking about the American Giants. And he told Johnny played at San Diego State. I think 9 or 10 guys got contracts. Johnny got nothing because of his race. So Walter said, Johnny, come on back to Chicago. No, I'm not as good as the Negro League player. He says, yeah, you are. He pitched in the Negro Leagues for 3 years. Johnny went back. How good was he? He led the league in hitting. Pretty impressive. So he was signed by Bill Starr, the Padres, and he broke the color barrier, San Diego. And Minnie Minoso came, Luke Easter, Sam Jones, Suitcase Simpson. The list was lengthy of black ball players. They were very popular in San Diego. There was a bust of Johnny Ritchie at Petco Park with some friends and family, the Ritchie family. We raised money, and we had a hell of a hard time giving it to the Padres. I don't know why, but and I told them, don't you realize this is part of the team's heritage? Johnny was a local San Diegan. Everybody knew who he was. Johnny said he didn't endure the abuse that Jackie Robinson did. Johnny said the first game he played at Layton Field, everybody was cheering for him. They knew who he was. And I said, it's not just the Padres that did this, it was the San Diego fans that were so accepting of these ball players. And they loved these black ball players. So strange things. But Johnny Ritchie was a great guy. Walter McCoy died. He was 95. He died in 2015. Great guy, just a great guy. He was Buck O'Neill. You heard of Buck O'Neill? If you watched Ken Burns baseball, and when the chapter that they did on black baseball, Buck was interviewed, and Buck was out here, and he. So whenever I'd see him, he always would call me Santa Claus. How are you, Santa Claus? So I asked Buck. I said, "What kind of pitcher was Walter?" And he said, "Look at him. He's a cigar store Indian. And Walter had some Indian in him. And I mean, his face was just, that's the way he looked all the time. He says, but he's got a good fastball and he's not afraid to come inside. And, and in the old days, there's a book signing over, and Peter Bavasi was there, and Walter was there, and Walter was telling him how he pitched, and Bavasi said, "You ought to go down to the Padres right now and tell them how to pitch. You pitch inside. The plate belongs to you. It doesn't belong to the hitters. And if you hit them, that's their problem." Baseball was played very differently. So this is what happens. I get off the subject. Here's what happens in 1910. Rube Foster brings a team out here. They're the Leland Giants out of Chicago. And they placed second in the Winter League because the Winter League, the California Winter League, was integrated. Going back to the 1890s, blacks and whites were playing against each other. In San Diego, they were playing against each other. They were playing on the same teams. The racial, it wasn't perfect, but it wasn't like in other parts of the country. In 1912 and 13, and there's a very fine book. It's called California Winter Leagues, baseball's first integrated teams. They write about the 1912-1913 season, and it's very abbreviated. And I know why it's abbreviated. The Giants came down to San Diego, and they never went back to LA. The LA teams weren't good enough. And the Giants and the Bears played 24 games from November to March. San Diego won 14 of them, and the Giants won 10. These are some of the cartoons that appeared in the paper. And you will quickly see they were very racist. They're terrible cartoons. Rube Foster is depicted as just a big monkey. And the first articles about the baseball between the Bears and the Giants, they were just very derogatory, embarrassing to read. But then something miraculous happened. And the Giants stayed in San Diego because they were good. And San Diego was good. And more importantly, people went and watched them. And they paid money. Because in California, I don't know what it is, California's always been populated with a bunch of cheap sons of bitches. I think they still are. That didn't want to pay to go watch professional ball. So they spent the whole winter in San Diego. And as I said, the cartoons are terrible. When it comes around, you'll see how bad they were. But the Union then, later the Union wrote, the American Giants are the only players in Southern California that really have caused the locals to extend themselves to the limit and caused any doubt as to who's who and why. How's that for great writing? Huh? Okay. This is from the San Diego Union, March 23rd, 1913. And in after years, those of us who held berths on the inside circuit can turn pages back through the dusty memories and tell the newcomers of San Diego that once upon a time, San Diego had a real ball club. And right here, it should be written that these aforesaid Giants played ball of the highest caliber of quality, and that could be compared with the work of major league teams. Every time the Bears and Giants met at Athletic Park, it was a battle. Everyone and play was important. It was really probably the first really important thing that happened in San Diego baseball. And I want to read a quote from a guy that I respect. His name is John Holloway. He's white, and he wrote more about the history of the Negro Leagues than anybody else ever had. And I think he probably has written more now than anybody subsequent. He's talking about Rube Foster. Rube Foster would become the father of the Negro Leagues, historian John Holloway wrote. White baseball had never seen anything quite like Root Foster. He was Christy Matheson, John McGraw, Connie Mack, Hal Spalding, and Kennesaw Mountain Landis. Great pitcher, manager, owner, league organizer, czar, all rolled into one. One man did all this, a black man. They're incompetent, right? They can't do anything. This guy did the whole thing. He drew up schedules. He was a miraculous organizer and a real hero of baseball, and he is in the Hall of Fame. When Ted Williams went in the Hall of Fame, they never knew what Ted was going to say. And he said something like, "There's something I want to say." And they thought, "Oh no, what's he going to say?" And I think he said something like, Willie Mays just hit his 500th home run. I think that was it. And I think Ted had 512. And he says, "Willie's going to pass me." And I say, "Way to go, Willie." He says, "I am telling you that Negro League ball players belong in the Hall of Fame. Not in some special wing, they belong in the Hall of Fame." So more than any other force, the great Ted Williams is responsible for Negro League ball players being in the Hall of Fame. Again, to me, that's a great legacy. Williams was, he was really what I guess we call a latchkey kid. His mother, I met his mother, I worked downtown when I was in high school on G Street, down this way, and this wasn't a great part of town. And the woman, the secretary, she called me, "Bill, come on here, I want you to meet somebody." She didn't tell me who it was. And there's this woman, and she's talking, and she's just nuts. She's peddling the Salvation Army newspaper, the War Cry or something like that. And then she starts talking about Teddy. It's Ted Williams' mother. So I'm 17, and I'm not real perceptive on these things. I just thought the woman was nuts. But the more I've learned about Ted, I never had the opportunity to meet him, but enough things happened, and I interviewed a lot of ball players. And they called him the Kid because he played with the Padres. And he signed with the Padres in 1936. And I tell people that at the end of the 36 season, ball players didn't take much money. He didn't go out and get a job. He had to go back to school. He hadn't even graduated from high school. And he's playing at the highest level of baseball next to the major leagues. It's AA, they didn't have AAA. So he really understood the game. Greatest hitter who ever lived. I've been trying for years to get a statue of Ted Williams down at Lane Field. And dealing with politicians, I am Santa Claus. And I'm known as Baseball Santa. I've played baseball for a team called House of David. Anybody ever heard of House of David? They're a religious colony in Michigan, and they had biblical guys. They had long hair and beards, right? So my best friend, was promoting a game, and so he said, "How about if Santa Claus plays for you?" So I played for the House of David, and it got written up in the Chicago Tribune. It was a lot of fun. The House of David used to play against the Negro League teams. They were a very unusual religion, very, very unusual. The thing that made them so unusual is they were tolerant. Now, how many religions do you know that are tolerant? They were, and they were good ball players. Satchel Paige called them the Jesus Boys. So, getting off. I think I read that, and I'll put your glasses back on. I'm nearing the end. Okay. Here's the part that just breaks my heart. The importance of black baseball was something I hadn't expected in my research. The other thing I didn't realize, I always thought the Padres were the first professional team we had. They weren't. First team was the Bears. Not the Bears I told you about, not the Palmer's Bears, but the Southern California League Bears. They were Class D, and in 1913, they were in the league. And these are the teams that are in the league. The Long Beach Beachcombers, the Pasadena Millionaires, the San Bernardino Kittens, and the San Diego Bears. Okay. The owner of the Bears was former Major League outfielder Dick, known as Sir Richard Cooley. And the reason he was known as Sir Richard is because he was a very gentlemanly, regal fellow. Well, we'll see how long that lasts. That's been here. So all his players were new. San Diego was the class of the circuit. They were so good that everybody else, no one could keep up with them. And that caused fans not to come out and say their towns. But here's what really happened. I'm going to let you have it right between the eyes. The clergy in Long Beach and Pasadena pushed a ban for Sunday baseball and against alcohol. So they did it against Sunday baseball and alcohol. My wife can't hear. And Cooley was very bitter, and this is what the man said in 1913, over 100 years ago. The league is dead. I can't understand the people. And I don't believe they'll make baseball pay here in 1,000 years. I'm convinced they don't want baseball in San Diego. I can go further, but this because you're the Historic Society, you don't want anything as modern as the 20s, right? That's too modern. Yes, dear?
Just talk louder.
Talk louder? Could you hear me at the back?
Oh, yeah.
She can't hear. She can't hear. Does anybody have any questions? Anything you want to say?
Just as a follow-up to my wishing you an earlier birthday. Now, Spock's comment about live long and prosper. I've used this for a number of years, and you can steal it for an article. When somebody has a birthday now, I say, may you live at least as long as it takes the Padres to win the World Series. In other words, live properly.
I ran into a guy at Costco today. I ran into a lot of people at Costco in the food court. And he said, because another guy said, this introduced me, and he said, and this guy said, I can name the starting lineup of the '84 Padres. And it turned out he was a freshman in high school. And I told him, I said, well, that was the golden age of baseball. He said, well, I didn't know that. And I said, no, I'm going to explain to you what I mean by that. Because I've studied baseball rather extensively, and I get asked that question. But I grew up in the 50s, and we were told the baseball we were watching wasn't as good as the old days. Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb, Chrissy Mathewson, Walter Johnson. You're not seeing now that good of baseball. But now we realize it was excellent baseball, because among other things, Williams was playing, the usual. The Negro Leaguers were coming in, so blacks were playing baseball. And you had Willie Mays and Hank Aaron, so it was great baseball in the 50s. So here's the conclusion I've come to. And tell me if I'm not right. The greatest era of baseball is when you were a kid. When you were learning baseball. And you knew all the players, and you knew all the lineups. And it was such an exciting game to you. And we watch it now, and there are a bunch of millionaires, and it's just not quite the same. But so for me, the 50s. How about for you? What's the greatest era for you?
60s.
Okay.
98.
98? I think we know why 98 was. That's what this kid was, 84. The Padres went to the World Series, and that's a nice greeting. May you live as long.
My favorite is 1952 because I've got the color picture of the team, and I was there when the Padres won the PCL championship against the Hollywood Stars. So.
Yeah, 1954. It was a one-game playoff and down Lane Field, and Bob Kerrigan, pitching on a couple of days' rest, beat the Stars, and they had a parade down Broadway, and it was the biggest thing since DJ Day, the parade downtown. San Diego will support a winner.
I think my earliest baseball memory was a game at Lane Field with the visiting Boston Red Sox and Jackie Jensen against Rocky Colavito and the Cleveland Indians in an exhibition game. And that was an early memory.
Well, Colavito played for the Padres.
No, I didn't know that, really.
And he had that great arm.
Huh.
And Ralph Kiner was the general manager, so he wanted, they're always doing things to kind of promote, get more people out. So he's going to try for the record, the length of, farthest throwing. And there was a breeze that came off the bay, and so the Padres always loaded up on left-hand power hitters. The ball would, I think it was 335 down the right field line, but it's really 325, and balls would fly over and bounce on Pacific Highway. Well, he was hoping that Rocky would throw from left field into right. Only the wind was blowing in that day, so he ended up throwing from home to center. And I think he threw it like 432 feet.
Wow.
That's a long way. You don't see ball players, they're always hitting the relay man.
Yeah.
Back then, you had guys that, would throw guys out at the plate, and they could do it.
Yeah.
A friend of mine was with Pittsburgh, and the great Roberto Clemente. My friend was a third baseman. He said, I hated getting throws from Clemente. Well, we hear about what a great arm Clemente had. Well, how would you like to catch a ball? And it wasn't just because he threw it hard. It had no elevation. It just came right at you from the outfield. And he said, and it would hit the grass and it would skip. You didn't know what it was going to do. So, go ahead.
I've heard the story, and I don't want to, whatever you do, don't debunk it, but tell me if there's any element of truth about
No,
Ted
it's not.
Williams.
Yeah, it's
Ted
false.
Williams hitting the ball over the right field fence, the longest home run in baseball history.
Well, I'll tell you. There's a plaque down at Lane Field, and that story's on there, and people love the story.
I love the story.
They just love it, and the fact that it's probably not true doesn't matter.
Well, I don't care,
But-
it's a great story.
It's a great story, and are you with the historical? Okay. I found the article, and it was LA Times that wrote about it
Oh,
in
did they?
1937,
Wow.
confirming the story.
Huh.
And Ted was gone by then, he hadn't heard it. But for those of you who don't know, the ball supposedly sailed out, bounced on the Pacific Highway, went into a boxcar heading to LA. So when it gets to LA, there's a Pacific Coast League ball, and they find it, and the train just came in from San Diego, and so when they contact some of the sports department at the paper, and Earl Keller, I know it was Earl Keller, because he was something else. He could really tell some stories. He had Ted batting 300 as a rookie, and he didn't. When you read the batting average in the paper, you don't get out your slide rule or now you'd go to the computer, but people don't bother that. And it was really, I think, batting 291, and they had him batting 300.
But he did hit a home run that went off from San
We're
Diego
not
to
even
Los
sure of
Angeles,
that.
right? He never stopped.
When I was interviewing people for the book, I wrote a book on the PCL Padres. The players, they thought Jack Graham hit it. They thought Max West hit it. They thought Luke Easter, big black ball player, powerful guy. He could really hit home runs. And then George McDonald. Does anybody remember George McDonald? Original Padre. He and Bobby Dorr signed with the Stars when they were 16 years old. Dorr went on to the Hall of Fame. McDonald never made it to the majors. He was too much of a clubhouse lawyer. But he says, oh, by the way, I hit the longest home run. He says, it's in Ripley's, believe it or not. Well, I looked and looked and looked, and I couldn't find it. I could not find that this was true, but I thought, well, I'll put that on. So it's down there, but if I can find it, I'll send something to Jamie, the clipping, because people love that story, that Ted Williams hit the longest home run. And then when I finally made contact with Ripley's, they said, no, it wasn't Ted Williams, it was Babe Ruth.
Oh, come
And he hit it somewhere in Pennsylvania, and the train ended up in Chicago. So it's much more than 120 miles.
Can I ask you one more quick? Growing up in the 50s here, listening to Padres games, the away games were broadcast by Al Schuss.
Yeah.
Could you tell us how Al Schuss broadcast? He would be broadcasting Padres games from elsewhere, but how did it actually go?
Okay, what he's referring to is that Al Schuss was a beloved broadcaster, and his call for home run was, and there it goes, there it goes. When the Padres went on the road, and it cost a lot of money, to travel with the team, Western Union, for all these teams, would send telegrams, just a little brief, strike one, ball one. out, you know, doubled. And then these broadcasters, including a guy named Ronald Reagan, you ever hear him?
Oh, yeah.
He did the same thing when he was broadcasting in Des Moines. And they would make up these stories. So you remember Al Coupe on Channel 10, broadcaster? He and Schuss were doing these broad for the Padres. So Schuss was gone, but I interviewed Al Coupe. He said he used to get so mad at Schuss. He said, and we'd be broadcasting a game from Hawaii. So I mean, it's 3 o'clock in the morning here, and you know, he says, I don't know that anybody was even listening. He says, and then Schuss would start. Oh, it's a beautiful day here at Aloha Stadium. The wind is coming in off the ocean. The palm trees are swaying. I don't know. I've ever seen a more beautiful day. And Coupe is going, hurry up. He says, I get it. Okay, this pitcher really works fast. That's strike one. Strike two. Oh, he's really fast. Okay, that was a ball. He's out. Okay, next. And he's flying through it, and then Schuss would take over. Pretty funny stuff. But then, no, that part's true. I don't debunk that.
Okay.
But you know, radio was so important to us then. And those of you that did grow up with radio, I remember how your imagination would really take over. And it was, I guess that's enough. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you very much, Bill,
Thank you.
for sharing your history of baseball with us with a little gift from the foundation for you.
Well, thank you.
History Talks is our monthly lecture series for the Gaslamp Historical Foundation. Next month it'll be Wednesday, July 10th, and